Hey guys, this is W3C Ray, and today we want to talk about multi-way all-ins in PKOs, and we will focus on the three-way multi-way all-in situations. Of course, in the tournaments you will also see four-way all-in situations, probably five or even six-way all-in situations, but those are so complicated and hard to measure that you cannot give a general advice on those situations, and you will have to do the simulations if you want to know which combinations are usually good, close, or very bad in a calling situation. And let us hop into the introduction. And I already mentioned the first point. When you look at the multi-way and you're looking at a more complicated situation. Not only that bounties are involved, which can have a different size, you have also different stack sizes involved, and of course you can sit in different positions. So to simplify the situation, we would say two players are all in front of us, and we're sitting in the big blind and considering which combinations we can call against both players who are all in. And already here we have to regard a lot of different informations. The two stack sizes, the two bounties, the stage of the tournament, probably future EV. So if we win this all in against both players, we will have of course a significant increase usually in our stack. And this enables us to probably call more all-ins in the future. So since we covered them, their bounty is in play, and therefore future EV might be a point which we have to regard. Also, compared to the non-KO case of multi-way all-ins, the side pot equity can be very important, very significant. So a short stack is jamming, other stack which covers him slightly, for example, is over jamming, but this stack has a way bigger bounty than the stack which did jam in the first place. So winning the side pot actually has a huge benefit because the guy with the bigger bounty has the bigger stack. So we have to look at side pot equities. So our equity against this one range and not the two ranges combined, and this can already lead to a huge overall range increase which we want to call. With all the bounties involved and all the willing to probably get it in more wide, don't forget ranges usually get stronger per player involved. So one player is jamming, another one is rejamming, another one is rejamming. So the third player is usually very strong, the second player can already be very strong, and the first player, depending on the stack size, can be also very strong, so has a very strong range. Probably you are facing three very strong ranges, so you don't want to call very wide in this situation. The plan of this video is to develop an easy plan on how to approach multi-way all-ins. So let's go ahead and look at the plan. It's actually a very simple plan. First of all, we are defining the most important player and his range in the multi-way all-in scenario. So if the first in jammer, for example, is covering the second player who's calling the all-in, then the most important player in this all-in is of course the player which is first in open jam, because the side pot equity might be already big enough so that it's only important to us to win against this player. Of course, effective stack sizes are also important. So if the first in jammer for some reason is jamming 50 BB, the second player is jamming 49 BB, then this is a totally different situation to the first in jammer is jamming 15 BB and the overcaller is calling 14 BB. The stage of the tournament, the stack worth is very important, but in the all-in situation, you try to focus on the most important player. The most important player is usually the player who covers everyone and has the strongest range. Sometimes this is not combined the case, sometimes it's combined the case. To me personally, the most important player is usually the player with the biggest stack, because the stack by itself also means for me future EV. So if I win against this player, I have a bigger stack, and then I can create more situations in the future where the bounty is in play and I can call an all in. So I usually focus in a multi-way all-in on the biggest stack. And then we go ahead with step 2 and we estimate the required equity against this one player. I use the bounty power concept, so the equity drops against this player. So I look at his bounty and I look at his stack size, and then I just estimate, probably he has 15% range, probably he has 20% range, and I can very easily decide which combinations are a call and which combinations are a fold against this one player. Of course, this is a very simplified plan and it doesn't work for all situations, and it looks like very simple, but if you follow those two very simple points, then you will already first of all stop punting a multi-way ends, and second of all will end up with most of the times the correct calling range. So if you focus on the biggest stack and estimate your calling range against the biggest stack, your resulted estimated calling range usually will be close to the optimal range. Now, there will be some exceptions, especially in Ace-X, King-X combinations, and we will look at this later on in the video. Before we will look into the simulations and the outcomes of the simulations and the cheat matrices which I did create for several situations of multi-way all-ins, we will first try to open the black box of multi-way all-in calculations. And for this task, we will take an example. Here we have the cutoff who is open jamming round about 11 big blinds. The button is rejamming 35 big blinds. We are sitting in the big blind holding ace-4 suited. And the question is if we can call ace-4 suited or not in this multi-way all-in. This is a €250 progressive tournament. Of course, the starting stake was 250k and both opponents have a starting bounty. Now, in a multi-way all-in calling scenario, you are not only regarding 3 possible outcomes like in heads-up, you're either winning, losing, or tying in a heads-up pot, you have 13 different outcomes already in a 3-way all-in. So we will have to regard 13 different equities in a 3-way all-in. This is the example. So I say the cutoff open jam 7.8%, and to simplify the situation, the button rejams also 7.8%, which is 7s plus ace-10 suited, ace-jack offsuit, and king-queen suited. And for our example, we want to calculate the value of jack-10 suited. So if we would hold jack-10 suited in the big blind, can we call jack-10 suited or not? And how big is the EV of jack-10 suited if we want to call? So we are calculating our total equity of jack-10 suited against both ranges, and we will have 25.5% win percentage against both ranges. So this is the percentage of the times where we will win the whole pot, the main pot and the side pot. But we want to break this down a little more. And here is the breakdown. HRC gives you this breakdown, or ICMizer also gives you the breakdown, and those are the 13 possible outcomes of a 3-way all-in. So the first outcome, everyone is splitting. Second outcome, cutoff and button is splitting and we are losing. Or we can split against cutoff and button loses. In this case, for example, we would win the side pot. Here we have that we win and both cutoff and button split. This, by the way, means we are also winning the full pot, so the total pot, the main pot, and the side pot. When you want to use this calculation or want to do this calculation by yourself, don't be confused by getting all those percentages. They are just broken down in all possible outcomes. So, and all possible outcomes are shown as a permutation of a placement of all players in a certain order. So for example, in this order, player 1 wins, player 2 becomes second. In this order here, player 2 becomes first, player 3 becomes second, player 1 becomes third. So this is the output of HRC. I personally do like a little bit more the output of ICMizer, which looks like this. So don't look at this for now, just look at this tabular here. You have a cutoff push, button call all in and the hero overcalled, so we are sitting in the big blind. And here it is directly written down which situation is meant by which probability. So cutoff wins, button wins the sidepot, we are losing. We are winning, cutoff wins the sidepot, button is losing. And in this case, when we are winning and cutoff wins the sidepot, doesn't matter that cutoff would have won a sidepot because the sidepot is not existent, since we are covering both players. So don't get confused by this breakdown of probabilities. Just look at the sidepot equity if the sidepot is existing. If it's not existing, like in this case, then this is just a raw win probability. Now, what to do with these probabilities? Well, we will use these probabilities to calculate our whole EV. And our whole EV of doing an action, so calling preflop, is compared to our opportunity action, which is folding. So now we will use all those percentages. I scroll up a little bit, and now we want to focus on this little tabular here. So I have written down the stack sizes here to show you this very shortly. The stack sizes were 37,000, 120,000, and we are sitting in a big blind covering both players. So those are the stack sizes for our example hand. Those are the big blinds and the ante and how many players we had at the table. This is just a little help calculation, and here we have the pots. So the total pot is 283,000, the main pot is 118,000, and the side pot is 165,000. So we have a very significant side pot in this situation. Note also that the starting stack of this tournament was 250k, so button has only half of a starting stack, and cutoff has only 1/6 of a starting stack, approximately. Now, our next step is we want to calculate the stack dollar values before the hand. So we just take the chips and divide it by the total chips in play, and then we get the stack dollar value. The total chips in play are on the very bottom here. I just made the simulation which had 1000 players, so our total chips in play are 250 million chips, and so we just divide 38,000 by 250 million, multiply this by both price pools, and then we get the dollar value of the cutoff stack. Same we are doing for the button, and same we are doing for our self. And now we are using the percentages, so we will write down all the percentages in the correct order. So we will look at all the possibilities where we win the whole pot. Let's look at this tabular here. I did write down 2.63%. Let's search for this. So here's the 2.63%. We are winning, and both of the other players are splitting, which is meaningless because we will cover both players. So them splitting doesn't lead to them winning any chips in this pot. Also, I did write down 2 times 11.25%. Let's search for this. So we have here hero wins, cutoff side pot, hero wins, button side pot. Again, we are covering both players, so they are not winning any chips in those cases, and those two cases are also the cases where we are winning the full pot. So I did write down all the percentages here. Here we have 10.3% for winning a side pot. Here in this case, button wins, we are winning the side pot. This is not the case because button is covering cutoff. So in this case, we would lose the full pot. The case where we are actually winning the side pot is that cutoff wins, we are winning the side pot, and button loses, and here we have the 10.3%. So this situation here, which I just mentioned, should stand in the case where we are not winning anything. So here are nothing, it's named, and here we have the 10.3%. Also, of course, if one of the two players is winning the full pot and we are always losing, so let's say button is winning the side pot, then those percentages should stand here also. Here we have the cutoff, button is winning the side pot, so if we are losing against button and cutoff, 24.7%, and of course if the button wins, then he wins the main pot and the side pot, and this is also 24.7%. Both are in this tabular. Those two are just split cases. The next possible outcome is hero wins half of a side pot. Half of a side pot means that cutoff is winning and button and hero are splitting the side pot. So 0.15%. look at the probability outcome. So cutoff wins, and we are both splitting, and the percentage is put here. Then half of the main pot plus side means we are splitting against cutoff and win against button. So we are splitting against cutoff. Here we go, 0.24%, and this is that. Now let's stop here. Those two percentages are taking the same way, and now we are look at the whole calculation. And now we are using all the equities which we have derived from the program and calculate the stack value for the different outcomes. And I will do one of the already calculated stack values now directly. So I'll show you how to calculate one of those, and then you could calculate all the others by yourself. So let's take the example where we win the total pot. In the case where we win the total pot, we are winning our stack minus the big blind, we are winning the button stack, and we are winning the cutoff stack. Also, of course, we are winning our big blind back, we are winning the small blind, and we are winning the antes. Now we want to divide this by the fold chips in play. The fold chips in play we had on the bottom here, those are the total chips. So this is our stack value after we win the hand, so the total pot, our new stack value. And we will multiply now our whole percentage on the total chips in play by the total prize pools in play, and the total prize pools in play are written down here. So this is the regular prize pool which is in play, also the bounty prize pool, of course, which is in play, and don't forget, two bounties are now taken out because we are winning one half of the bounty of the button and we are winning one half of the bounty of the cutoff. So we will take out two bounties. A bounty here was 116, so we take this bounty and we just take out one bounty for two players now. We will multiply everything and then we will have our stack $EV. Additionally, of course, we are winning two bounties. We are winning the bounty of the button and we are winning the bounty of the cutoff. So we are taking again the bounty value and multiply this by 2. So we are taking two bounties. And of course, we are only taking half of those two bounties. So we can divide this by 2 again. Of course, we can now take this 2 and this 2 away, but just for the matter of completeness and simplicity. And there you go, you have the stack value when you win the total pot. And all the other stack values are calculated the same. Now let's use our hard worked out probabilities here. So now we would calculate the EV of our whole action. We will calculate all the stack values for every possible outcome and then multiply them by the probabilities of this outcome to happen. So to get the EV of winning the total pot, we are taking the value of winning the total pot and multiply this by the sum of all three percentages where this outcome actually happens. And this will give you the total EV of when we are winning the pot. Now we will do this for all of the other possible cases which can happen, and we will end up with the total EV of Jack 10 suited in a call, right? So the total EV of Jack 10 suited in a call is we are winning the total pot and we are winning the side pot and we are losing and we are winning half of the side pot and we are winning half of the main and half of the side pot, or the total side pot here, half main and total side pot. Then half of the main pot and half of the side pot. And when we are splitting versus all. And we will compare all of the outcomes with their probabilities to the EV when we are just fold. And the EV of folding is here stated at the very top. So when we do the whole calculation, then we will end up with a dollar number. So I'll show you the total EV calculation here. I take all the different probabilities for the different outcomes, sum them together, and multiply them by the $EV of the stack for this outcome. So all of the $EVs for the outcome times the probability that this outcome will happen. And in the end, I just subtract the stack $EV when we are folding. So M9 here, and M9 is the stack $EV when we are folding. And the total EV of the Jack 10 suited hand with the bounties in play is here calculated in this Excel sheet, 12.84%. Now let's look at the simulation result if we did right. So I did already state this here that HRC displays 12.81. Let us look if this is the case. So here we have Jack 10 suited, and you can see our $1 is here rounded up $12.9. So within the rounding accuracy, I think I did something a little bit different here in the setup for the calculation today. Within routing accuracies, we did break down the multi-way calculation in HRC and get the correct value. So just to verify this here, cutoff jam 7.8%, button rejam 7.8%. Those two stacks were in play, and we are sitting in the big blind and calling, of course, the 117k against the button's rejam. All right, there was a lot of work, and now, of course, we want to benefit from all the work. And first of all, just look at the outcome here. So I did take two rather tight ranges, 7s plus and very good ace-x and king-queen suited. And you can see here a very interesting behavior of calling multi-way all-ins. You will usually get this, that the ace-x combinations are kind of horrible to call, and also you will see that your suited connectors are exploding in EV. So if you want to compare, for example, a good hand like King 8 suited, 9 8 suited is just twice as good to call here. The EV of 10 9 suited is better than any high card suited which you can find above. The EV of Jack 10 suited is rather close to Queen 10 suited, and all are way better than Ace 10 suited. So Ace-X combinations in a multi-way are usually kind of inferior compared to the lower partners like King 10, Queen 10 if you take Ace 10 for example. Another note, what you will see is that the offsuited combinations are becoming very fast, very bad. Meanwhile, the offsuit combinations in the connectors are getting better and better. Of course, we are now looking at two very tight ranges, and I will show you later on how the combinations here are actually getting way better compared to, for example, Ace-X or King-X combinations. Now, to solve the spot fully and not only for our opening up the black box, I would now change the jamming ranges to something which I find a little bit more realistic. So we are looking at the 11 big blind jam. Cannot imagine that the cutoff is folding like any ace suited, probably sometimes, but I don't think so. I think players are still over evaluating the value of the suited connectors here. Probably 9-8 suited, leave out of course any pair is going in, and let's say King 10-0 and let's say ace-7, ace-5, probably queen-jack, something like this, so probably in this some kind of this neighborhood for the cutoff jamming. And I think since button is covering the player and gives himself a lot of fold equity, I think like suited kings from the button are usually in. I think hands like 8-7, 7-6 suited. I think in the offsuit combinations players are rather tight. Probably he's rejamming any ace, but I will leave those out, and I think like 26% are a good estimation to start. And of course we are sitting in a big blind holding ace for suited, but I just want to show you how fast the range is skyrocketing if the two players are having somehow wider ranges. So we are nearly calling any two. And if you want to look again at the EVs of the combinations, 8-7 offsuit, 9-8 offsuit, and compare this to the EVs of the offsuited high cards, those EVs are usually beating the EVs of their partners in the high cards. So 7-6 is beating King 6, 9-8 is beating King 8, 8-7 is beating King 7, and of course all the other offsuited 7x combinations. So what you will see is that those connectors either on the suited side or on the off-suited side are usually beating their high card partners in multi-violence. Also note that those ranges are not like super wide, right? We are talking about 23% and 20, let's round about 27% rejamming range. And already we are calling like close to any two, but we are aware that some of the combinations are like always good, some of the combinations are very situational. And this will be our next point to work out which combinations are always good and which combinations are situational. Before we want to do this, I just want to show you the outcome of the hand because it's probably for the awareness of what will happen in those tournaments very important. Here the cutoff is jamming his 10.76 big blind, button is rejamming his round about 34.5 big blinds, and we're sitting in the big blind. Of course, we snap with ace-4 suited, and very important is that the player here did rejam the worst possible ace-x he can find. So if the player is rejamming his offsuited, worst offsuited ace-x, I think it's rather fair to say that the button has all of the ace-x inside and probably is even wider than this. And now, since the cutoff is way shorter, and we now just tighten up the cutoff by a lot to 8.7%, and we will look at how much we can call in this situation in the big blind, and we end up with the same range. So in this specific scenario, this is what I was talking about in the presentation before. Focus on the player which has the biggest stack and estimate which combinations you want to call against this player. Clearly the button is the most important player in this all-in scenario, and if most of our combinations are plus EV against his all-in, then the combinations overall will be plus EV. So the cutoff is not that important. I mean, I can even make his range way tighter, down to aces, kings, and queens. Now we will have a drop down in the range, but not by much. And this is of course like super unrealistic, right? So even against a very strong range and a wider rejamming range, if you are calling the stable combinations, which I suggest in the matrices, I will show you later on in the video, then you will never punt. And of course you can always adjust your calling range depending on how you expect the players to open jam and to rejam. Alright, very soon you will find in the range viewer all the worked out multi-way calling ranges. I just want to give you a short view over the ranges. So what you will see in your range viewer is multi-way calling versus bounty power 1 and bounty power 1. This means that both players have a starting stack and a starting bounty, or two starting stacks and two starting bounties. And I did simulate most of the possible situations which will happen in game. So either one player has a small bounty and the other one has a big bounty. One player has a start bounty, the other one has a start bounty, both have a starting stack. Both players have big stacks and small bounties, and so on and so on. So I did simulate everything, and I did put all the simulation work together in the range viewer and in the matrix, which I will show you very soon. Look at the outcomes first, just of some very short examples. So in this case here, for example, the players had bounty power 1 and bounty power 1, which means that one player has a start stack and a start bounty, and the other player has a start stack and a start bounty, or two star stacks and two star bounties for both players. And in this case, the short stack had 15 big blinds. So in this tab, you will see three different simulations. First of all, the 15 BB stack is open jamming and the 30 BB stack is rejamming, and you will always see green combinations and blue combinations in your range viewer. The green combinations are always stable calls, so those are, I always click the call button, and the next natural calls are the calls which are close in EV already, or sometimes only break evenish. But if you expect either the open jammer to be a little bit wider, or in this case, way more important player, the 30 BB rejam stack is rejamming way wider, then you will add those combinations to your calling range. If you look at the 15 BB open and 15 BB rejam, I did put in once the stable non-KO calls in this range. This is the range which you would call in a non-bounty case, so only 8s plus ace queen suited and ace king, and you would increase your range if you expect both players to jam a little bit wider. You would increase your range to like 7s plus all ace queens, sometimes ace jack suited. Probably at that point, very important how I did construct the open jamming range and the rejamming range for all the simulations. So for the open jamming range, since we are looking at the 15 BB short stack, I did usually or always take out top range. So I always took out queens plus because I expect the players to just open raise those kind of hands as an exploit and jam the rest of the range. And for the rejammer, I did just tighten up usually a lot because HRC sometimes wanted to rejam 40%, sometimes wanted to rejam 30%. And I think if players are rejamming against short stacks and behind them are players which are covering them by a good margin, then players tend to be way tighter than they should in Nash equilibrium. So I did tighten up the rejamming range in the most cases to what I thought was realistic, which was usually around about 20%. Very dependent, of course, on the situation. We will come to this later when we will look at all of the possible outcomes. And now we can just go through the whole list. So for example, here we have the short stack, the 15 BB stack has a bounty power of 2. So this means that, for example, he has a start stack and 2 start bounties, and the rejammer had a bounty power of 1. So this has 1 start stack, 1 start bounty, or 2 start stacks, 2 start bounties, and so on. Versus the 15 BB case, you can already see that compared to the situation which we had before with the bounty powers both 1, our range is increasing by a huge margin, and versus 15 and 30 BB also our range is increasing by a huge margin. Now I took all the simulations which you see here, I don't want to click on all of those, and put them together in a matrix. And now we are looking at the matrix. So let's take a deep breath and start. First of all, on the very left top of this whole matrix, it's stated it's the multi-way calling range in yellow. So in the line here, the first in jammer is shown, and in orange, the rejammer is shown. What does it mean it is shown? In this case here, the open jammer has a low bounty power and the rejammer has also a low bounty power. So this range is against two all-ins who have a low bounty power, for example 0.5 and 0.5, which means that the open jammer has, for example, 2 star stack and a start bounty, and the rejammer has also 2 start stacks and 1 start bounty. Now we are going to the middle, and the middle means that the open jammer had a middle-ish bounty power. So for example, 2 start stacks and 2 starting bounties, which is a bounty power of 1, and the rejammer still is low. So he has, for example, 2 starting stacks and 1 start bounty, which is a bounty power of 0.5. Now we are going another step to the right. In this case, the open jammer had a high bounty power, so for example a bounty power of 2, and the rejammer still has a low bounty power. So this, for example, means the open jammer had 2 starting stacks and 4 start bounties, and the rejammer still had 2 starting stacks and 1 start bounty. Both had, in this case, 15 big blinds. So this is our whole decision matrix against a 15 BB stack who is open jamming and a 15 BB stack who is rejamming. We're sitting in the big blind and considering if we can call or not. Now a very important side note here. You might now say, okay, 15 BB, this is super specific. And I just took those two values as a stable point. It doesn't really matter if the if the first in jammer has 20 BB and the rejammer has 20 BB. It doesn't really matter if the first in jammer has 15 BB and the rejammer has 20 BB. As long as you are in this neighborhood, you can very easily adjust your calling ranges, and the green range is usually the range which is always stable. So the EV is so high of all the combinations that you can always call, and the blue combinations should show which are the next natural combinations. So for example, if you had this scenario here, where the first in jammer had a high bounty power and the rejammer also had a high bounty power. Let's say both had a starting bounty and both had 0.5 starting stacks. Okay, let's say both players had 12 BB. If those two players had 12 BB instead of 15 BB, you would just call all the suited combinations, probably down to ace 4 offsuit, down to king 5 offsuit, down to queen 6 offsuit, and like all the connectors, all the offsuit connectors, and queen 7 offsuit, queen 6 offsuit, and so on. So you can easily adjust your multi-way all-in calling ranges to the stack sizes. This is just a stable point. So for 20 BB, just call the green range and probably leave out most of the blue combinations. If you think that the first in jammer, the 20 BB jammer, is rather wide and the rejammer is rather wide in a 20 BB case, still call all the suited combinations and all the other blue combinations which are shown here. So you can easily adjust your all-in calling range to even different stack sizes, always depending on the bounty sizes. So just work a little bit with this kind of matrix so that you can spot very fast in game which situation you're looking at. So let's say I see in game that first in jammer has 2 starting bounties and 1 starting stack, and the rejammer has 1 starting bounty and 1 starting stack. Immediately I know, okay, I go to the high value of the first in jammer and I go to the middle value of the rejammer and I call this green range. Right, so this is how you use the matrix. You're just looking at the combinations and then you're making your decision. Now, since we have discussed how we want to use this matrix, let's look at the effects which you can see in a multi-way all-in calling scenarios, because you can see this very nicely if you see all the solutions for all the possible different outcomes. And let's look first at all the situations where the bounties are probably not that big, which are in play. So at the low-low scenario and at the mid-low scenarios and probably even at the mid-mid scenarios. So in this kind of cases, we are looking at the ace-x combinations, and all of the like ace-x combinations are usually like not very good calls, right? So very stable calls are usually ace-queen, sometimes ace-jack, but for ace-jack, both players should have already like a middle-ish bounty power, so 1 start stack and 1 start bounty, for example. And in most of the ranges, even if you're going to the high cases, the ace-x combinations are usually not very good calls. Why is this so? Both of the open jamming ranges are containing, of course, a lot of good ace-x combinations, and we are highly dominated in both of our opponents' ranges with low even suited ace-x combinations. So those are just not very good calls. On the other hand, the two jamming ranges are not containing a lot of suited connectors, because suited connectors are just not good open jams, and suited connectors are performing actually very good against ace-x calling ranges. So even in the tightest scenarios, we have like the suited broadways, the queen jack suited, the jack 10 suited a lot of the times inside of the ranges. So those hands are already like pretty good, because they are not dominated as often when they make top pairs, and the suited connectors down here are probably not dominated at all, besides of the over pairs and pairs which are in both jamming ranges of the all-in players. What you have also seen already in the simulation which we did before is that the 10x suited EVs are usually higher than the Queen X and Jack X suited EVs, and the 9x suited EVs are usually even higher than the Queen X and the King X suited EVs. So for the suited connectors, the EV is usually very stable, very high, and the calls in the, let's say, King 8 suited and Queen 8 suited are usually for like the low or middle-ish bounty scenarios, like not very good. Like not very good, close. Of course, if you increase the bounty of the players, then your calling range is becoming bigger and bigger. But where we actually increase our range the most is in the suited hands. So in this example here, in the case where the open jammer has a high bounty compared to his stack size and the rejammer has a middle bounty compared to his stack size, here the 7-5 suited is like a snap fist pump call. Meanwhile, the Jack 5 suited is a fold, and Queen 5 suited is a fold, and King 5 suited has a lower EV than 7-5 suited, and Ace 5 suited has also lower EV than 7-5 suited in the call. But still, like, the calls were like very clear, so the green range is always like clear, you have to call this combination. And if you're going even a step further and say, okay, I want to increase my next natural combinations, 8-7 offsuit and 7-6 offsuit are way better calls, next natural calls, than let's say A7 offsuit or Ace-8 offsuit. So those combinations were already like plus EV or close in EV, meanwhile A7 offsuit were just completely abysmal call. So keep in mind, even those offsuited connectors have way higher EV than your high card offsuited combinations. Now, one very interesting effect which can be discussed here also is, why are the ranges not symmetric? So both stacks are equally big, right? And one time the open jammer has a high bounty and the rejammer has a low bounty, and in the other case the open jammer has a low bounty and the rejammer has a low bounty. And since both stacks are equally big, why are the ranges not the same, which we want to call in the big blind? And the answer is pretty simple. So in this case here, a player who had a high starting bounty is open jamming, and the player who has a low starting bounty is rejamming. The player with the low bounty in this case has of course a higher incentive to rejam because a lot of dollars are in play compared to stack sizes. So his rejamming range here is rather wide against the high bounty open jammer. Now when you turn around the situation and say the open jammer has a low start bounty and the rejammer has a high start bounty, then the rejammer will be rather tight. Why? Because, well, there's a big blind, we are sitting in the big blind and we can call, so he probably expects us to call, of course, wider since his high bounty is in play, so his rejamming range will become rather tight. And you can also see this in our combinations that his rejamming range is becoming rather tight. Here we are calling at least some more of the suited Ace X, meanwhile here even Ace 9 suited was like a clear fold. This means that in the high rejamming range a lot of strong Ace X and pairs were included, and in this case our Ace X are just miserable calls. Meanwhile 10-8 suited was a snap. So 10-8 suited in this scenario where low bounty open jammer and a high bounty rejammer takes place, 10-8 suited is a snap call, meanwhile Ace-9 suited is a snap fold. Alright, having discussed the 15 BB 15 BB or 20 BB 20 BB or 12 BB 12 BB case in the multi-way calling scenario, now we are going to the case where a short stack is open jamming and the bigger stack is rejamming. And that took the two values, again the 15 BB value and now for the rejammer a 30 BB value, and the rest of the matrix works the same. Oh, this looks pretty good. Yeah, I will snip this out again new, but for the video it doesn't really make a difference. So again, here the bounty of the first in jammer is increasing in this direction, and down the bounty of the rejammer is increasing. And of course what you can see is that the ranges in total are way tighter than the ranges which we had against the two short stacks which are jamming. So look at those two ranges here, for example, and now look at those two ranges here again. Those two ranges are way tighter than in the 15 BB case. The first simple argument why they are way tighter is that our odds are just getting worse, right? So if a 30 BB stack is rejamming, our odds of calling in the whole pot, we now have to call 29 BB. Meanwhile, if the rejammer had only 15 BB, we only had to call 14 BB in the whole pot. So our odds are getting worse, and so we need more equity in this case. What you can also see is that we are adding our combinations more symmetric if a 30 BB stack is rejamming instead of a 15 BB stack. What I mean by more symmetric is in the ranges for the two short stacks, we have seen that the ace-x combinations are usually like not very good calls, right? And our suited connectors were added very, very fast in those scenarios. And here, for the low case or mid-low case or even mid-mid case, you see that the ranges are like super stable. So we don't increase our range by huge margin depending on the bounty because our odds are just not getting good. In the multi-way scenario where bigger stack is rejamming on a short stack, you want to have high bounty powers in play. So either those like 30 BB are still compared to a start stack very low and have one start bounties in play, or the rejammer already has like a lot of bounties accumulated, so those 30 BB compared to his bounty are just not very much, and then you can increase your calling range. As long as this is not the case, you have to be rather tight in calling multi-way all-ins when the rejammer has a significant stack. What you can also see in general that like the offsuited Broadway combinations are usually not very good calls, right? Even in like the high scenario where we already did discuss that in this case when a low bounty guy is open jamming and the high bounty guy is rejamming, the high bounty guy usually has a very strong range, so we rather add those suited tens and call suited broadways and just fold a lot of ace x and offsuited broadways. And those offsuited broadways, especially like queen jack offsuit, right? Queen jack offsuit is only in our calling range in a case where both players had a very high bounty power. So for example, both had like 2 start bounties and 1 starting stacks, or 4 start bounties and 2 starting stacks. In this case, we will add queen jack offsuit, and in all other cases, we are folding queen jack offsuit, right? So even in the high bounty power open jammer and mid bounty power rejammer case, we fold queen jack offsuit, and we rather call jack 10 suited, 10 9 suited, 9 8 suited as the next natural combos. Also, you can see a very interesting effect in those two ranges here. So those two scenarios are for the whole bounties are play comparable. Here we have a high bounty power of the first in-jammer and a middle bounty power of the rejammer, and here we have a middle bounty power of the first in-jammer and a high bounty power of the rejammer. And what you can see here in this case, so where the rejammer has a high bounty power, we are calling a lot of suited connectors, and in the case where the rejammer has a middle bounty power, actually fold a lot of suited connectors. So why there is such a significant difference in the calling ranges, meanwhile like the ace-x combinations are actually rather stable in both ranges, right? And also like the king-x combinations are rather stable in both ranges. So what is the difference in those two scenarios? Meanwhile, like the raw dollar values in play are the same. And again, in this scenario where a guy with a high bounty power, so a high bounty compared to his stack size, is rejamming on a guy who has a middle-ish bounty power, so a middle bounty compared to his stack size, his rejamming range is just rather tight, versus a rather tight rejamming range which contains a lot of ace-x, king-x, and is very pair-heavy. Suited non-dominated hands have a very high EV. In the other case, where the short stack had a high bounty power, so had a very high bounty compared to his stack size, and the rejammer had only a middle bounty power, so a middle-ish bounty compared to his stack size, in this case, the rejammer actually is very wide, or wider than in this case. And when his range is wider, then the value of our suited connectors is just dropping, so it's falling off in EV. So in this scenario, we are calling actually less. In general, you can say on multi-way all-ins where bigger stack is involved, so a bigger stack is rejamming on a short stack, that the ace-x combinations are in general not very good calls, so not very high in EV. Of course, you have like those very good ace-x calls like ace-jack suited plus, and then it's like very situational on how you expect the rejammer constructs his rejamming range. If you think that he will rejam a lot against the short stack, then of course you will increase very fast in your ace-x combinations also, but you will especially increase in all of your suited hands, especially suited connectors like 9-7, 9-6 suited, 7-4 suited, etc. Those combinations will become way faster, way better. And additionally, so this comes hand in hand. The ace combinations are not like super very high EV combos. Meanwhile, the Queen X, Jack X, and even like the 10-9 suited are usually like great calls in the multi-way in scenarios where a bigger stack is involved. So feel free to use those two matrices. I would love to see you in the Discord channel. That's it for today, guys. Good luck at the tables and bye bye.